Hello and welcome to a special BriefingsDirect Thought Leadership panel discussion coming to you in conjunction with the Open Group Paris event and member meeting October 24th through 27th, 2016 in France. Given that the Paris event has a focus on the latest developments in e-government, our panel will now explore how public sector organizations can gain economic benefits from cloud interoperability and standardization. As government agencies move to the public cloud computing model, the use of more than one public cloud provider can offer economic benefits via competition and choice. But are the public clouds standardized sufficiently for true interoperability? And can the large government contracts in the offing for cloud providers have an impact on the level of maturity around standardization? I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Interoperability Solutions, and I'll be your host and moderator as we examine how to best procure multiple cloud services as e-government services at low risk and high reward. With that, please join me now in welcoming our panel. We're here with Dr. Chris Harding, Director for Interoperability at the Open Group. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Dana. It's great to be in this podcast.
Super. We're here also with Dave Linthicum, Senior Vice President at Cloud Technology Partners. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you very much, Dana.
And lastly, we're here with Andras Sakal, Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at IBM US Federal. Welcome, Andras.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're glad to have you back. Andras, let's start with you. I've spoken to some people in the lead up to this discussion today about, the level of government sector adoption of cloud services, especially quote-unquote public cloud. They tell me that it's lagging the private sector. Is that what you're encountering, that the public sector is lagging the private sector, or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, I think it's a bit more complicated than that. I think that the public sector born on the cloud adoption is probably much greater than the public sector. Boy, say that a few times and to differentiate. So the industry at large, from a born on the cloud point of view, is very much ahead of the public sector government implementation of born on the cloud applications. And what really drove that was innovations like Internet of Things, gaming systems, and platforms, whereas the government environment really was more about taking existing government to citizens, to government shared services and so on and so forth, and putting them into the cloud environment. So when you're talking about public cloud, you have to be very specific about the public sector and government, because most governments have their own industry instance of their cloud. In the federal government space, we're very acutely aware of the FedRAMP certified public cloud environments, and that can go from moderate risk, where you can have access to the yummy goodness of the entire cloud industry, but then also too, we see this movement to FedRAMP High, which would then isolate these clouds into their own environments in order to increase the level of protections and lower the risk to the government. So their CSP, the cloud service provider, created instances of these commercial clouds fit for purpose for the federal government. And in that case, if we're talking about enterprise applications shifting to the cloud, we're seeing the public sector government side at the national level move very rapidly compared to some of the commercial enterprises who are more leery about what the implications of that movement may be over a period of time. And there's not anybody that's mandating that they do that by law, whereas that is the case on the government side.
Mm-hmm. Dave, it seems like if I were a public cloud provider, I couldn't think of a better customer, a better account in terms of size and longevity than some major government agencies. What are we seeing from the cloud providers in trying to attract the government contracts and perhaps provide the level of interoperability and standardization that they require?
The big three, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, are really making an effort to get into that market. So they all have federal sides of their house, and people are selling into that space right now. And I think that they're seeing, some progress. I mean, the FAA, certainly the DoD, in moving in that direction. However, they do realize they have to build kind of a net new infrastructure, net new way of doing procurements, to get in that space. And in some instances, in the case of AWS and building, the world's biggest private cloud at the CIA, they've had to, change their technology around the needs of the government. So they see it as really the Fortune 1. They see it as the largest opportunity that's there, and they're willing to make huge investments into the billions of dollars to go capture that market when it arrives.
Right. Over to Dr. Chris Harding at the Open Group. It seems to me that we might be facing a situation where we have cloud providers offering a set of services to large government organizations, but perhaps a different set to the private sector. That, from an interoperability and standardization perspective, doesn't make too much sense to me. What's your perspective on how public cloud services and standardization are shaping up? Are we where you expected things to be at this point?
Well, thank you, Dana. The government has an additional dimension often to the private sector when it comes to procurement, in terms of the need to be transparent and to be spending the money that's entrusted to them by the public in a wise manner. And one of the issues they have with a lack of standardization is perhaps that it makes it more difficult for them to show that they are visibly getting the best deal for the taxpayers when they come to procure cloud services. And the Open Group produced, in fact, a guide to cloud computing for business a couple of years ago. One of the things that we argued in that was that when procuring cloud services, the enterprise should model the use that it intends to make of the cloud services, and therefore be able to understand the costs that they were likely to incur. And I think this is perhaps more important for government even than it is for private enterprises. And I think, yes, you're right that the lack of standardization makes it more difficult for them to do this.
Chris, do you think that interoperability is of a higher order of demand in public sector cloud acquisition than in the private sector, or should there be any differentiation?
I think both really have the need for interoperability. The public sector perhaps has a greater need simply because in a lot of cases it's bigger than a small enterprise and is therefore more likely to want to use more cloud services in combination.
Back to Andras, we've certainly seen a lot of open source platforms emerge in private cloud as well as hybrid cloud. Is that a driving force yet in the way that the public sector is looking at public cloud services acquisition? Is open source a guide, if you will, to what we should expect in terms of interoperability and standardization in public cloud services for eGovernment?
Yeah, well, I think open source from an application implementation point of view is one of the questions you're asking, but are you also suggesting that somehow these cloud platforms will be, reconsidered or implemented via open source? There's truth to both of those statements. So IBM is actually the number 2 cloud provider in the federal government space. If you look at hybrid and the commercial cloud, for which we provide 3 major cloud environments for, and all of those cloud implementations are based on open source. OpenStack, Cloud Foundry are key pieces of this, as well as the entire DevOps lifecycle. So I think open source is important, but if you think of open source as a way to ensure interoperability, kind of what we call in the Open Group environment executable standards, it is a way to ensure interoperability. I would say that's more important at the cloud stack level than it is between cloud providers, because between cloud providers, you're really going to be talking about API-driven interoperability, and I think that we have that down pretty well. So the economy of APIs and the creation of these composite services, they're going to be very, very important elements, and if they're closed and not open to, following the normal RESTful approaches that defined by W3C and other industry consortia, then it's going to be difficult to create these composite clouds.
Dave Linthicum, we saw with OpenStack its origins in a government agency, NASA, for example. In that case, clearly a government organization, at least in the United States, was driving the desire for interoperability and standardization, a common platform approach. Has that been successful? Is that not the case anymore? And why wouldn't the government continue to try to take that approach of a common open source platform for cloud interoperability?
Yeah, I think OpenStack has had some fair success. I wouldn't call it excellent success, and really I think one of the issues that the government kind of left it dangling out there, and while using some aspects of it, I really expected them to make some more adoption around that open standard for lots of reasons. So they have to hack the operating systems to meet very specific needs, very specific needs around security and governance and compliance and things like that. They have special use cases such as the DoD and weapons control systems and real time and some IoT stuff that the government would like to move into. So that's out there really as an opportunity. So in other words, their ability to kind of work with some of the distros out there, and there's dozens of them, and really kind of get into a special government version of that operating system, which is supported openly by the government integrators and providers, is something they really should take advantage of, and it really hasn't happened so far. It's a bit disappointing.
Do you have any insight, any of you all, into Europe? Some of the government agencies there, they haven't been shy in the past about mandating certain practices when it comes to public contracts for acquisition of IT services, and I think cloud should follow the same path. So is there a big difference in what's going on in Europe and in North America?
Yeah, this is Andras. So I just got off the phone a few minutes ago with my counterpart in the UK. The really nice thing about the way the UK government is approaching cloud computing is they're trying to do so by taking the cuffs off the vendors and making sure that they're standards-based. They're meeting a certain quality of services for them, but they're not mandating, through policy and by law, the structure of their cloud. So it allows for us, at least within IBM, to take advantage of this incredible industry ecosystem we have on the commercial side without having to consider that, you might have to lift and shift all of this very expensive infrastructure over to these industry clouds. And the EU is in similar ways following a similar practice. Obviously data sovereignty is a really important element for most governments. So we see a lot of focus on government data sovereignty and data portability, more so than we do around requirements for, strict requirements around following a particular set of security controls or standards, that would lock you into and make it more difficult for you to evolve over a period of time.
Yes. Chris Harding, to Andras's point about data interoperability, do you see that as a point on the arrow that perhaps other cloud interoperability standards would follow? Is that something that you're focused on more specifically than more general cloud infrastructure services?
Well, I think you have the cloud is a huge spectrum from as you say, the infrastructure services at the bottom up to the business services, the application services, software as a service. And data interoperability, in a way, sits on top of that stack. And I'm not sure that this is something that we're ready to get real data interoperability yet, but I do think it is important that the work that is being done on trying to establish common frameworks for understanding data, for interpreting data, is very important as a basis for gaining interoperability at that level in the future. And I think we also need to bear in mind that the nature of data, if you like, is changing. It's no longer a case that all data comes from an SQL database. There are all sorts of different ways in which data is represented, and data in, if you like, human forms such as text and speech, is interpreting those is becoming more possible and more important. So I think this is the exciting area, if you like, where we'll see the most interesting work on interoperability going forward.
Dave Linthicum, one of the things that some of us who have been proponents of cloud for a number of years now have looked to is the opportunity to get something that couldn't have been done before, a whole greater than the sum of the parts. It seems to me that if you have a common cloud fabric and a sufficient amount of interoperability for data and or applications and infrastructure services, and that cuts across both the public and the private sector, then this difficulty we've had with health insurance, payer and provider interoperability and communication, sharing of government services and data with the private sector, many of the things that have been probably blamed on bureaucracy and technical backwardsness in some ways could be solved if there was a common public cloud approach adopted by the major public cloud providers. It seems to me a very significant benefit could be drawn when the public and private sector have a commonality that having your own data centers of the past just couldn't provide. Am I chewing on too much pie in the sky here, Dave, or is there actually something to be said about the cloud model, not just between government to government agencies, but the public and private sectors?
I think the public cloud providers, out there, the big ones are getting more savvy about providing interoperability because they realize that it's mostly going to be multi-cloud. It's going to be different private and public cloud instances, different kinds of technologies that are there. They have to work and play well with a number of different technologies. However, to be a little bit more skeptical, over the years I've kind of found out that they're in it for their own selfish interests, and they should be because they're a corporation. So they're going to basically try to play up their technology to get into a market and hold onto the market. And by doing that, they typically operate against interoperability. They want to make it as difficult as possible to integrate with their competitors and leverage their competitors' services. So we have that kind of dynamic going on. And it's incredibly frustrating because we can certainly stand up and have the discussion and reveal the concepts, and you just did a really good job in revealing, in that, this is the nirvana, and we should start moving this direction. You'll typically get lots of head nodding from the public cloud providers and the private cloud providers, but the actions speak louder than words, and thus far it's been very counterproductive. Interoperability is occurring, but it's in dribs and drabs and nothing holistic.
Yeah. So, Chris, it seems like the earlier you try to instill interoperability and standardization, both in technical terms as well as methodological, that you're able to carry that into the future, and we don't basically repave cow paths by basically having highly non-interoperable data centers replaced by them being in the cloud rather than in some building that you control. What do you think is going to be part of the discussion at the Paris Open Group event, October 24th, around some of these concepts of e-government, and shouldn't they be talking about trying to make interoperability something that's in place from the start rather than has to be imposed later in the process?
Well, certainly this will be an important topic at the forthcoming Paris event. But my personal view is that it's a very difficult balancing act, the question of when you should standardize something to gain interoperability. If you do it too late, then you just get a mess of things that don't interoperate. But equally, if you try to introduce standards before the market is ready for them, then you generally end up with something that doesn't work and you get a mess for a different reason. So it's really, and part of the value of industry events such as the Open Group events and other events is for people in different roles in different organizations to be able to discuss with each other and get a feel for the state of maturity and what are the directions in which it's possible to create a standard that will stick. And we are seeing, if you like, we're seeing standard paradigms, the API paradigm that was mentioned earlier, and I think we need to start building more specific standards on top of those. And certainly Paris and future Open Group events, those are things we'll be discussing.
Right. Andras, you wear a couple of different hats. One is the Chief Technology Officer there at IBM U.S. Federal, but you're also very much involved with the Open Group, and I think you're on the board of directors. How do you see this progression of what the Open Group has been able to do in other spheres around standardization and both methodological, such as a enterprise architecture, TOGAF, for example, a framework, as well as the implementation and enforcement of standards? Is what the Open Group has done in the past, is that something you expect to be applicable to these cloud issues?
Well, IBM has a unique history, being one of the only companies that's only in the technology arena that's over 100 years old and has, kind of been able to retain great value to its customers over that long period of time. And that is that we shifted from a fairly closed computing environment to this idea of open interoperability and freedom of choice. And that is our approach for our cloud environment as well. And what drives us really is because in this direction is because our customers, require it from IBM. And we are a common, infrastructure kind of glueware that binds together many of our enterprise and the largest, financial, banking, healthcare institutions in the world to ensure that they can interoperate with other vendors. And as such, we were one of the founding fathers of the Open Groups, which has been at the forefront of helping facilitate, this discussion about open interoperability. I'm totally with Chris as to when you would actually approach that. I think, as I said before, my concern is that you interoperate at the service level in the economy of APIs, and that would suggest that there are some other elements to that, not just the API itself, but the ability to effectively manage credentials, security, some other common services like being able to manage object storage to the place that you would like to be able to store your information so that data sovereignty isn't an issue. These are all things that will occur over a period of time, I think. It's early, heady days in the cloud world, and we're gonna see all of that goodness come to pass here as we go forward. But in reality, cloud, we talk about it as if it's a thing. It's really true value, not so much in the technology, but its real value is in creating these new disruptive, business capabilities and business models. And openness of the cloud actually does facilitate that creation of those new business models. So I think, that's where we need to focus. Are we able to actually drive these new collaborative models with our cloud capabilities? Because you're going to be interoperating with many CSPs, not just 2, 3, or 4, especially as you see different sectors grow into the cloud. It won't matter where they offer their cloud services from. It'll matter how they actually interoperate at that API level.
Right. Yeah, it certainly seems to me that the interoperability is the killer application of the cloud, if you will. It could really foster greater interdepartment collaboration and synergy, government to government, state to federal, across the EU, for example, as well, and then also to the private sector where you've got healthcare concerns and you've got monetary and banking and finance concerns, all very deeply entrenched in both public and private sectors. So we hope that that's where the openness leads to. Chris, before we wrap up, it seems to me that there's a precedent that has been set successfully with groups, among them the Open Group, when it comes to security. We've been able to do some pretty good work over the past several years with cloud security using standards, adoption of standards around, say, encryption or tokenization, for example. Doesn't that sort of give us a path to greater interoperability at other levels of cloud services? So security, is that a harbinger of things to come?
Well, security certainly is a key aspect that needs to be incorporated in the standards where we build on the API paradigm. But I think really cloud is a part of. Some people talk about the move to digital transformation, the digital enterprise. So cloud and other things like the Internet of Things, big data analysis and so on, they're all coming together. And a key underpinning requirement for that to happen is platform integration. And that's where the Open Platform 3.0 forum of the Open Group is really centering on the possibilities for platform interoperability to enable digital platform integration. And security is a key aspect of that, but there are other aspects too.
Well, great. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been discussing the latest developments in e-government and cloud adoption with a panel of experts. Our focus on these issues comes in conjunction with the Open Group Paris event and member meeting October 24th through 27th, 2016 in France. And there's still time to register, so please check out the Open Group website at www.opengroup.org for more information on that event and many others coming in the future. With that, I'd like to thank our guests. We've been here with a panel that consists of Dr. Chris Harding, Director of Interoperability at the Open Group. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, Dana.
We've also been here with Dave Linthicum, Senior Vice President at Cloud Technology Partners. Thanks, Dave, for your contribution.
It's always a pleasure, Dana.
And we've been here with Andras Sakhal, Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at IBM US Federal. Thank you so much, Andras.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And a big thank you as well to the Open Group for sponsoring this discussion. And lastly, thank you to our audience for joining us on this BriefingsDirect panel discussion. This is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Interoper Solutions, your host and moderator. Thanks again for listening, and do come back next time.